My name is Carrie McNabb, and I'm a coordinator with the Alberta College of Family Physicians, and I'm really excited to help moderate this session tonight. Um, Again, we're doing the check-in and check-up webinar series. We have a really special feature this evening. It's 1 year later with Dr. Jody Carrington. So for those of you who don't know, we actually had Jody grace us with her presence on two separate nights back in April of 2020. So we're kind of continuing some of those themes and those conversations in tonight's session. I'm going to take us through a couple of introduction slides as everyone gets settled, and then I'm going to turn it over to our host for this evening, Dr. Janet Craig, who's a committee member on our virtual education committee, and then she's going to help us host Dr. Jody Carrington, our speaker for this evening. Before we get into anything, I would like to take a moment to recognize that we are webcasting from and to many different parts of Alberta today. The province of Alberta is located on Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 territory and is a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples. Now more than ever, I think it's a really important moment to reflect on what truth and reconciliation means to you. And I hope, considering the 215 children that were found in a mass grave outside of Kamloops, British Columbia, that we really look and consider and go through some of the calls to action that are outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. So we've posted a link here, food for thought for later, for now, but take the time. As we dive into our session tonight, Jody and Janet are going to tackle lots of questions, but our focus is going to be on what challenges physicians have been facing across the province. And we realize that COVID-19 is the big ticket talk, as it has been for over the last year, but we're mostly concerned about you and how you've been affected. Jody is going to touch on some really great takeaways to hopefully apply to your situations and what we can do to address this burnout that everyone is facing. A note of disclosure, this program receives financial support from the Alberta College of Family Physicians and a grant through the College of Family Physicians of Canada. Just a note that we have a new committee to the ACFP, new as in put together in the past year. The Virtual Education Committee is now a standing committee under the ACFP that is dedicated to tailoring and putting together virtual education for all ACFP members. Couple of housekeeping notes. We have a chat log open. Please feel free to comment and connect with each other through the chat. But we also have a Q&A log that is separate from the chat. So if you have any questions directly for Jody, please make sure they get into the Q&A. Otherwise, we might lose them in the chat, and we want to make sure that they get answered. We also have an upvote feature in the Q&A, so you can like a question and it'll make sure the popular ones go to the top and get answered. This is also a certified event, so it's important to capture your attendance in a survey link that's going to be posted in the chat. And this makes sure that we get your certificate of attendance to you in just a week or two. Also, we really appreciate anyone who takes the time to fill out the evaluation. There will be a link to that posted near the end of the session in the chat log. And with no further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our host for this evening, Dr. Janet Craig.
Thank you very much, Carrie. So good evening, everyone, and glad you could join us with our special guest, Dr. Jody Carrington. My name is Dr. Janet Craig, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a family physician in Edmonton, and I also am involved with some of the continuing professional development with the Alberta College of Family Physicians. And I also do some work with the Alberta Medical Association and some patients' medical homework. So my disclosures are on the slide, and I don't believe there's any conflicts today. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Jody Carrington. She is a clinical psychologist, but she also is an author and a speaker. Her particular areas of interest are resilience, mental health, leadership, burnout, grief, and trauma, and how reconnection is the answer to so many of the root problems that we face. Jody, I'd like to turn it over to you to go over your disclosures.
Hello, I don't have any. So do I have to read all that? Is this appropriate?
No, you don't have to read it. I can do it real quick.
Okay.
She's getting paid a small speaker's fee for tonight,
Okay.
and she's
We practice this, right? Yeah. Okay.
she's a member of the Talent Bureau, and they manage her speaker fees for some of the speaking that she does. And she's not going to talk about drugs or devices tonight, so we're free and clear. So welcome, Jody. I think, and also I wanted to tell everyone that we're getting rid of the slides now. So if you want to, if it's not raining and you want to go for a walk or you want to just sit, you can get away from the computer. But if you want to use the Q&A or the chat function, I guess you'll have to have your computer. But anyway, so what we thought we'd do tonight, start off a little bit of a reflection between Jody and I about what the year has been like for family physicians. And then we can talk a little bit and, appreciate your questions or your comments. So let's reflect and think about how things were at the start of 2020. So 2020, new year, January, February, trucking along. And I always like to have my holidays kind of planned. Jody, I don't know if you've heard of the Tarzan principle. Dr. Mamta Gautam came up with the term. So her idea is that if there's something you really enjoy and look forward to, you always have the next one planned before the last one ends. So it's called the Tarzan principle because you're always grabbing the next vine before you let go of the back one. So I always try and have my next holiday booked before I finish one, so I have something to look forward to. So I was very much looking forward to my March vacation in 2020. And then, all heck broke loose the weekend before I was supposed to leave. And I was just going to the United States. I still could have gone. I was supposed to leave on March 12th, but if I had gone, I would have faced quarantine when I came back. So I made the decision not to go. And so I started off that whole pandemic crisis with a huge disappointment because I was looking forward to a holiday and I had to cancel it. Mm-hmm. So that's how my COVID experience started.
Here's what I think about is so interesting because we often forget, I don't know if you know this, but we often forget that physicians have lives. I don't know if you know about this, but we often assume that whenever you're just on call, like you just come in because you're on call, like that's it. You don't have something that has happened before. And I think here's part of the issue that I think is so interesting tonight to acknowledge and hold space for is that this has been, COVID aside, one of the most difficult years, I think, to be a physician in so many ways. I mean, I would love to see, I think we can get in the chat, even if I'd love to start to see some people's responses to this. Like if you could give me a 1 to 10, right? 1 being like the most fulfilled year you've ever felt as a physician, you're changing lives, saving lives. This is your calling, you believe that to be true, you feel filled up, versus 10 where you sort of feel a little bit like this is one of the hardest seasons and I'm not so sure that I made the right choice in profession. Like maybe not quite that big, but like when it is just exhausting. So give me a number in the chat. Janet and I are watching a 1 to 10. And I'd love to just sort of get a sense about, what this has been like, because obviously we've been doing this for some time. And, as you're doing that, I think one of the things that I really want to talk a lot about, I think, is really this idea that everybody agrees. 4 people said 7 and the other 72 people are like, no, I'm not even putting it in there. Oh, look, see, there you go. This is called pressure. So there's 7s and 8s and 5s and 8s. What I think is interesting about this, right, is, and this is the place that I don't know that we've acknowledged this nearly enough, is that when we couldn't count on much, we could always count on physicians. And when you are in a health crisis, I think one of the things that we failed to acknowledge the most, particularly in this province, is just how much you couldn't stop showing up. and not just showing up to do your job that you've always done, but to do it with layers upon layers of additional concerns, right? Not even physically, emotionally, all of these things. Plus, some of you were homeschooling your own babies. Plus, some of you were really, disconnecting from the people that you love that kind of kept us in the game. I don't know, Janet. I mean, when I look at these numbers, there's 73 of us on here tonight. And I mean, the average is not this is a significantly difficult year. Is that sort of your sense of, with your colleagues? What's your sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a tough year overall, but there's been highs and lows. So, looking back, I think probably March of 2020 was kind of a low because fear set in. You know, there were physicians dying in Italy. There were there was talk of many Albertans going to die. How was I going to look after my patients? How was I going to keep myself safe? How was I going to stop bringing this disease home to my family? There were all those issues that physicians were facing in March, and there was so much uncertainty about how many people were going to get it and what we were going to do to prevent it and so on. So I think there was a lot of fear, to be honest, and anxiety.
Well, and it's interesting when you say that to me. So as a child psychologist, here's what I know to be true. I wish that somebody would have told me this in grad school, that what I was treating was not anything that I had to modify in terms of behavior or cognition. What I was really treating was emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation, right, is basically the thing that all of us do well. If we want to be effective at our job, if we can get our patients, our clients, the people we serve regulated, we will be much more effective when we start to have conversations. When I have seen the most dysregulated kids on the planet, so emotional dysregulation, as you all know, when we talked about this a year ago, is like how not to lose your friggin' mind. When people are the most emotionally dysregulated, it is very difficult to care for them. And how you don't, the fundamental understanding of all of this for me is how we walk kids through hard things is we actually have to show them. We have to be regulated ourselves. And the more we stay regulated in the presence of another human, they start to believe that they can do that too. And they take on those skills and then they can give them away. The primary components of emotional dysregulation are this: fear, uncertainty, and no end in sight. So when I think about the most dysregulated kids I've ever seen on the planet, when I apprehend a kid in the middle of the night and take them to Child and Family Services, fear, uncertainty, and no end in sight, right? Those are the most losing your mind kids. What are the criteria, the things, the ingredients of a global pandemic?
Those three.
Uncertainty and no end in sight. So we have a globe full of emotionally dysregulated people. Not only the ones that we're serving, but the ones we're going to work with every day. So we are, as a crew of people who are supposed to be the ones everybody depends on to be regulated, I'm so grateful that we got to come back and have this chat, because my concerns aren't necessarily our patients, who I can promise you will be continually emotionally dysregulated in the days, weeks, and months. I mean, let's just I'm going to rip your soul out first, and then we'll put it back together before we end tonight. I think the effects of this pandemic haven't even begun to unfold. Because, as you know, there's a big difference between the stressor and the stress response. We have been in a heightened state of arousal for 15 months. Even in this very privileged province that we live in, we've been in a heightened state of arousal, which means the body keeps the score. So now once we start to get back to normal, or we remove the imminent threat of this illness, this heightened state of arousal means that, the limbic system doesn't know that. The amygdala is not quite convinced that we need to relax. And the effects of this heightened state of arousal will show up now in significant emotional dysregulation, which is often the heart of all mental health issues. And so what I wonder a little bit about as we gather here tonight is not necessarily so much about how we address our patients, our clients. What is so critically important is how we look after each other in the next days, weeks, and months. And it is something, we started out today with a land acknowledgement, and I think it is really what the acknowledgement or what the Indigenous peoples have taught me more than anybody on this planet in the last 6 months in particular, is the importance of simply acknowledging each other. Because when you're acknowledged, you will rise. And you have been asked to do so much more with so much less in one of the most stressful years of your careers, of many of your careers. And what I think that I want to make sure we really attend to, I mean, this is the heart of burnout, is we stop acknowledging each other. We stop saying, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're here tonight, Janet. Or that was amazing. Can we talk about this case? Or, you come out to your car, listen, out to the parking lot at the end of a really long shift, and there's a note tucked under your windshield wiper that just says, I need you to know you're amazing. Right? It is simply those acknowledgements that we stop doing when we get overwhelmed, right? We become very egocentric, and we lose this idea that well, just a second. What is all of this for? What am I doing? We lose that ability to acknowledge each other.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I was one of the pilot clinics in Alberta doing COVID vaccines. So in April, I was providing Moderna vaccine to people for their first doses. And I've never seen such grateful patients in my life. And so that filled me up a little bit, and it helped.
I bet, right? Because typically, I mean, and here's the interesting thing about, physicians, and, particularly when you are in an ER, or when you're, serving the most dysregulated patients, typically people aren't coming to you because they're feeling great. Typically, this isn't a profession where you get lauded for, doing great things. You're usually serving people who are scared or dysregulated, or in a wondering state of, am I going to be okay? What's wrong with this? Can you help me understand? And there used to be more acknowledgement when people were regulated. But even when we look at some of the numbers significant, this is what I'm so interested in, because, the question is, are our kids going to be able to go back to school and learn even in September? Are we in a place where, we can get back to normal and make up for lost time? The part of the issue for me is that there is a significant dysregulation in this province. And we know that by some of the numbers that are coming now. Divorce rates this time over last year are up 30%. Child maltreatment numbers are increasing, as are domestic violence. And so when we look at emotional dysregulation at home, when financial distress are happening, you've been locked in the same place with your partner, you're starting to make decisions about whether, everybody's chippy and irritable. And I think about that even in my own family. My husband is now, he bothers me because he chews, that does he have to chew at the supper table, or the nose blow, which I was not aware of so acutely as I am now, that there is a honk, like he takes a run at it, and I'm fairly sure he's going to have an aneurysm every time, and I don't remember that when we were dating. But it's all of these things that make us a little bit more chippy and irritable with each other. And so subsequently, I think it'll be interesting to see what that means in terms of, when you serve a dysregulated population anyway, what happens when they get even more dysregulated, right? What does that do? What do you think? Do you think that's a thing we're going to see?
Well, certainly, I'm at the sort of end of my career, and I'm seeing more mental health issues in my patients than I ever have before, particularly in young people, children, adolescents, and young adults. Far more than I've ever seen before. And, everyone's got anxiety, everyone's stressed. It's really difficult.
Oh, I can imagine. And I mean, I have to talk about this, right? I've assessed and treated over 1,000 kids in this country, and I've never, not one time met a bad kid. I have met significantly emotionally dysregulated kids. And that's kind of my favorite. When I worked on a locked psychiatric inpatient unit at the Alberta Children's Hospital, those are my favorites. The kickers, the hitters, the biters, the ones that are using words like suicide at age 7, that are, doing all the things that would be considered a conduct disorder, or, even an oppositional defiant disorder, those kind of things. Those are my favorites, because behind every one of those is a disconnection to that kid. The emotional dysregulation is significant in the homes typically, and in their own bodies. And if we can address that relationship piece, then those babies settle. And what's really interesting to me about this is that we often treat the wrong person, because these babies with mental health issues often serve in a system of really dysregulated big people. And if we think about that even on a larger scale, what I'm most concerned about, and I speak to a lot of police officers and farmers. I talked to a bunch of at Farm Credit Canada this morning, just really speaking about how do we look after each other in the next days, weeks, and months? How do we never underestimate the capacity to just acknowledge each other, to say thank you at the end of the shift, to be able to bring your colleagues some high chews and leave it on their desk to say, like, listen, this is going to be a tough one today, but you got it. And I think sometimes we spend way too much time talking about self-care as a antidote to stress, and when the answer really lies in caring for each other, not our patients, but each other, right? Even as simple as, waving to our neighbors, buying coffee for the guy behind us, giving out a compliment, texting somebody tonight in your list, your people, that says, hey, I don't know if I tell you this enough, but you matter to me, right? It's that capacity to reconnect to the things that matter the most to us so we can continue to serve. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you're going to work every day and you're talking to people that are stressed and anxious, and then you have to come home and be chipper and happy. And like you said, it's more irritability at home, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, this is the truth, right? And I think, this is the interesting thing around burnout for me. So burnout isn't a new concept. This is Freudenberger first coined the term in literature in 1974. And he said there's three components to burnout. One is emotional exhaustion. So think about this, if this is anybody in your, community or in your clinics, you'll see this in organizations that are burned out. Emotional exhaustion. So Freudenberger said these three things and they still stand true today. Emotional exhaustion, a lack of compassion starts to set in, and an experience of futility becomes very prominent. So when you think about that, emotional exhaustion is like, not just like, you've trained or, it's been a difficult, whatever, there's a reason for it. But emotional exhaustion is when you're tired to your bones. You start to really wonder what's wrong with you. You start checking your own thyroid levels. You're doing things like, okay, why am I in bed at 7? Like, what is happening? I used to be able to, what is going on? And then you wake up tired. Or you think, tonight I'm going to sleep because I cannot even keep my eyes open. And there you are at 3 o'clock in the morning going like, relax. It's that emotional exhaustion that is tired to your bones that you then start to question, what is wrong with me? And we don't ask nearly enough in these states, what happened to me? Because this is that Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey just released a book 2 weeks ago called What Happened to You? And it's based on the trauma response, right? When we have been through a significant year as a globe, but certainly as the primary people at the helm of this trying to care for unwell people, the question is not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you? And when we put this into the context of a year, should there be burnout? Should emotional exhaustion be setting in? Okay, so when we think about when we're super tired, guess what the second thing that goes is? This idea of compassion, right? Because I'm tired. I start not liking people anymore. I'm a psychologist and I don't like people. This is a problem, I often tell this story because I was in the Walmart a couple of weeks ago, and there was a fella. Now I understand the importance of connecting in our community, so I'm always waving, and I walked into the Walmart and all the farmers got their masks on, and I'm proud, so I'm smiling with my balls. I'm waving at people. And then I had to just before I left the Walmart, I had to go the wrong, I decided I needed just some root beer. So I just dipped into one of these aisles and I was going the wrong way because I wasn't following the arrow. Very bad. So I came face to face with this farmer fella who had a mask on, and you know what he said to me? And so I thought he meant get down. I thought maybe there was a shooting or something. And so I said, sorry, honey, what's wrong? And he's like, you're going the wrong way. Do you know what happened in my head, Janet? I still can't believe this happened in my head, but I was 0.7 seconds away. What I wanted to do is I just wanted to ram him with my cart right into his penis and run over him a couple of times. And I got a website about connection, and I was gonna fight this guy in the Walmart. And so I start to think, where's my compassion? What is wrong with me? So I start to question myself. Even as I left that store, I thought holy shit, like maybe I got the depression. Something's wrong. And so we start to turn on ourselves, right? Because we're exhausted, because we start to lose our compassion. That's not who we are, right? As clinicians, as practitioners, we're wired for this part. So what are we losing? And then the third thing that Freudenberger talked about was this idea of futility, which is what's the point? It feels so big. Nobody else seems to care. Nobody else is supporting us as a group of physicians. You know what? Forget it then. You know what? You want me to work overtime? No, I'm not. No, that's not good enough for you. Do you understand? That futility starts to set in. So you can imagine what it looks like in a profession or a clinic or a group of people when there's a significant amount of burnout, right? When you think about emotional exhaustion, lack of compassion, and futility, where's innovation? Where's passion? Where's creativity? Where's hope? Huh? It becomes so exhausting to be able to think about, how we get back. And some of the antidotes then are like, okay, you got to do self-care. Well, or you got to be just nice to people, right? And we're like, at what point do you want to add more to my plate after those three things are also on there? I mean, and that's what I hear you saying. It must feel like that sometimes when we're like, also try not to get burned out while you save your communities. Okay.
Well, and don't forget, on top of the COVID pandemic, we had a provincial government that was not very supportive of family physicians, took away a lot of income sources, made changes to how we bill, and really brought a lot of distrust to physicians. So on top of the COVID pandemic, we're dealing with all that as well.
Like insult to injury, it must have felt like, right? At the time where you're needed the most. And the question is, how can we cut you back even further?
Right. Now we got a really interesting question here, Jody. Someone's asked, if we can't gain immediate access to mental health supports for our patients who need it now, what can we do in a patient visit in our clinic to support them most effectively, i.e., provide a lifeline to get them through the next few hours or days? What can we say to help? So I think that's a really good question. I mean, what can we do? What things can we say that help when we've got someone in front of us in crisis?
Okay. So first of all, what I think, there's a two-step process here. And this is, we're fixers, right? This is why we get into this. We want strategies and solutions and suggestions. And here's the part that we miss the most, okay, is simply this place of holding space, of acknowledging. There's two factors that come into play. And one is we got to look after each other first, because if you're not okay, patients don't stand a chance. And when you're dysregulated and anxious that you're not going to help them, and that goes even more when they're suicidal or there's, a heavy dose of anxiety or depression on the table. What becomes so critically important so many times is there isn't a quick fix. There isn't an answer. But I'll tell you the part we miss so many times is we don't hold space. Because we're often rushed for time, because there's often the next person that has to come in, because all of these things happen and we're so interested to fix. Here's the thing, even as a therapist, that I often get wrong is when people give me the story, I say, okay, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Okay. And I usually do the same things that you would do, which is always like, okay, so have you been running? Have you been exercising at all? Right? Have you been drinking your water? I mean, when people asked me that during the pandemic, I was like, shut up, Helen. No, I'm not running. And so it's often, I'll tell you what is so critically important in that moment is these three phrases that allow me to hold space. Tell me more. And you often don't want to know more because you often don't have time, but I'll tell you what is so critically important is I need that prefrontal cortex on so they don't leave my office distressed. Tell me more. What is the hardest part? And sometimes when a person in a position of power just asks that question, what has been the hardest part? It's just been everything. I just feel really overwhelmed and I can see that. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you told me. And when you get the deep breath, the sigh, even when kids are having a temper tantrum and they do the sigh, you know you're making ground. This is very true in therapy. This is very true in the office. If I can get a sigh out of somebody, I know the prefrontal cortex is back on. And now I can start to reason and make a plan. Tell me more. What's the hardest part? And this is a hard question. You can decide whether you want to use it or not, but I often use this. What am I missing?
Right.
And it is often just that sense when I get somebody say, yes, but I've tried that. Yes, but, then I know I got to shut up and hold space for a little bit longer. If I only have 30 seconds, I'm going to take 29 of those holding space. Because what I need is to get that prefrontal cortex on. 99% of the time, often now more than ever, I promise you this, particularly as family physicians, you will be in that role of, I just need to tell my story. I just need to be heard. I'm not sure what we're going to do. And then at least you have two brains in that moment that can respond to each other. But we often want to fix. And is there take charge moments? Oh my gosh, all the time. And you guys are good at that part, right? When when patients are really dysregulated, there's take charge moments all the time. But 99% of the time we try to fix before even just that sense of holding space. And so most effectively in that moment, I'm telling you, you know this better than me, but from a physiological perspective, what I want to do is get that heart rate down. What I want to do is get eye contact. What I want to do is do really, really interesting things like this, like not tell them to take a deep breath, but just take a deep breath in their presence. They will start to follow. And the more I can get them to drop their shoulders, in fact, I might even give that cue just while we're sitting here. Just drop your shoulders for a little bit for me right now. There you go, right? Right now, I would say to you, all 85 of you, relax your jaw. Drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth, because we slam it up there when the limbic system gets fired up. And wiggle your toes. And that's what a calm body feels like. And oftentimes when we give our patients or people even I'm speaking to over the internet, permission to do that, you know what happens? Things start to leak out their balls. So if you're not good with tears, do not do these things, because so many of your patients will be like, I don't know, right? We do know. We're in a heightened state of arousal. Your body is full of cortisol, and there's been very, very little options for oxytocin or dopamine. So in that moment, can I provide that sense of just calm for a minute? Then we solve the problem. Then we come up with strategies. Then we sort of say, okay, here's what I'm wondering about, right? But in that moment, it is often that whatever that took us, 2 minutes, 30 seconds sometimes, allows there's some clear thinking to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great advice. Just some little things that we can do in the office. Just make sure that our patients are heard, right?
Well, and it sounds ridiculous. And often, we were in school forever, taught about the importance of assessment and the importance of like patient care and all those kind of things. But I'll tell you, it is the thing, even as a psychologist, I miss the most. The more distressed somebody is, the more I want to help them. The more upset they become, the more, they remind me of somebody I love, the more invested I get in coming up with solutions and strategies. But I will tell you, most of what will be the significant treatment issue in the next year or two or three is really emotional dysregulation.
So tell us a little more about the term emotional dysregulation. What do you mean by it?
Okay, so emotional dysregulation means losing your friggin' mind. Okay, so let me just take it back. This from a neurological perspective, but when you bring a baby home from the hospital, how do they let you know what they need?
They cry.
They lose their friggin' minds. So basically they have one job on board to communicate with big people, which is to become emotionally dysregulated, to go into fight, flight, or freeze, to call for you to regulate them. And the job of little people is to lose their minds. The job of big people is to walk them home. In fact, we're biologically wired for connection. So if I were to put a crying infant in any one of your arms right now, regardless of your experience or comfort even with an infant, you would do your very best to co-regulate. It often involves a rhythmic rocking of some sort, because internally we are just, the heartbeat is the first thing any of us hear, and it is viscerally encoded into our bodies. And so this sense of soothing is really we're really wired for this connection piece. The more I walk a kid through emotional dysregulation, okay, come here, sharing is caring. No, look at mom. No, okay, that's not what we do. The more I do that, particularly 0 to 2 months is absolutely critical. But beyond that, 0 to 5 becomes so much important in this idea of emotional regulation. We never outgrow this. So when I get distressed, I can't tell what anybody has for skills of emotional regulation until they're losing their minds, until I threaten to punch them or steal their child or do something that is really going to set off their attachment system or their regulation capacity. Because when you and I are calm, our cortex is on and we got the access to everything, our higher functioning part of the brain. But all I know is when you get significantly distressed, then I know how much you have on board to be able to breathe through it, or ask me questions, or stay connected, or have access to empathy or kindness or compassion. If nobody's ever given that to you, you can't give it away. And when we see, particularly in the next little bit, people who struggle more, marginalized people, particularly people who have massive trauma histories, or, anybody who's experienced, just by face value, people in the BIPOC communities will struggle significantly with emotional dysregulation, not generally speaking, but when you have had more opportunity to be walked home through the hard things, you will show up better in spaces for the rest of your life. If you struggled with somebody to do that with you, for you throughout your life, or that's been undone because of trauma, you will have struggles when things get tough. And right now, things are tough for a large percentage of our population.
Do you think it's true that we need different kinds of support to help us amongst us? So for instance, if I have a difficult patient I'm dealing with, maybe the best person to support me is a colleague, not a family member who's not a physician. So do we need different types of support around us to help us?
Yeah, so I think if we move it from our patients, for what our patients need, to what we need right now, I would say there's a universal truth to anybody. And I would say these 3 things, regardless of if I'm talking to physicians or farmers or school teachers. My answer in my head to what it's going to take to be able to continue to serve in this place is I write the word reconnection. And it's on a sticky note on my computer. It's on my bathroom mirror and it's on my bedside table. And connection is an important word to me, obviously, but reconnection matters most. It implies by the very nature of the word that this isn't a one-shot deal. We will never get good at this, looking after ourselves so we can care for other things. It will be a constant battle. If you think about all your mentors in this business, right? They never arrived at this place. They got better at it if they focused on it. But it's really this idea that we continually need to reconnect, to repair, to get better at. In fact, Gottman talks about this in marriage. It's not how much you fight, it's your capacity to repair that predicts success. The people who make it and the people who don't. It has nothing to do with how much you disagree. It is so much more about your capacity to repair when things go rough. And this is really true in this whole place of being able to serve other people. What do we reconnect to on a daily basis so that we can step into the people who are dysregulated? I mean, this is what you've taken an oath to do, is you're going to serve people who struggle the most, right? So I love this question. So the idea is, first and foremost, before we think about anything else, there would be 3 things that I want you to think about reconnecting to on a daily basis moving forward. Your people, your breath, and why you do this stuff. Your people, I'm not talking about, the people who asked you to go golfing and, you didn't get to go. Those are not your people. They might be, but I'm talking about the people who know you to the core of you, right? That you need to use your title with, that you will sit on the bathroom floor with you in a pool of snot. That's your people. Are you connecting to the people who really know you? Are you sending a text to somebody? Are you, even if they're not on this planet, are you thinking about, oftentimes this is the issue. I go for walks on my hardest days during this pandemic, and I speak to my best friend who lost her battle to cancer at 44. And I often need to reconnect to her and say, okay, what are we doing? What's the plan? Let me know. Are we okay? And it's often in those moments of reconnecting to those people, it really reminds me of why I do what I do. The other thing that I think is really important, even as we just did right now, is this ability for us to breathe. To remind ourselves to do that, not just one time a day, but between every patient, between every Zoom call, as often as you can, because I need to drop that cortisol level so that at the end of the day, you don't want to throw a punch your own personal children. What is so critically important is how we reconnect in the run of a day so that we don't carry that all day to the end. So to our people, our breath, and for sure our why. And I mean, I think the last time we talked last year, I told you about this quote that I keep over my shoulder in my office. It's by a dead guy named Ram Dass. And he said this: we are all just here walking each other home. We are all just here walking each other home. And I often think that about that as a practitioner. I will not ever be able to single-handedly undo multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma. I will not be able to single-handedly undo many of the atrocities that people bring into my office. But my only job is to do the next best right kind thing. We're just walking each other home. I'm going to give you the best I got. And some days I won't even have a bra on and I don't even like people. And that'll be enough. And the next day I got a whole research plan in my head. I'm writing a book and we are buying coffee for everybody in the community and bringing charcuterie to the staff room. Okay? Both of those days were enough. And I think it's that idea, once we reconnect to those things on the daily basis, then we have the capacity to start to then stay connected to other people. How do we reach out to each other? Don't underestimate your power. Like, listen, relationship knows no hierarchy. Whether you give a compliment to a nurse, whether you give a compliment to the administrative assistant, when you give a compliment to somebody, when you notice somebody else in the run of a day, that's for you, not them. Because I know you are now stepping out of yourself and into somebody else, which is really just our tricky way of saying, how do we regulate ourselves multiple times during a day to stay in this moment of really the magnitude of what you're doing? I mean, if you only knew, Janet Craig, how many people think about you, right? And I often ask this of physicians: get the top 3 patients in your head who you'll never forget, right? In the top 3 right now, this will happen to all 84 of you. There'll be people fighting for space. Maybe the one that you saw today, the one you saw last week, the one you could, the one you wish you could have back, the one who died, the ones who died, the ones who, all of those things. If you can get them in your head right now, I promise you they think about you or their families 10 times as much. If you only knew.
Yeah,
And
I always talk about the Safeway cashiers. 19 out of 20 people are very pleased with their Safeway cashiers, but there's the one person out of 20 that's yelling at them or thinks they messed up their groceries or whatever, right? But at the end of the day, that cashier has to go home knowing that she did a good job for 19 out of 20 people. But unfortunately, she remembers the 1 out of 20, right? So I think as physicians, we need to do that as well. We have to remember that the 98% of our patients are very happy and very grateful for what they're doing for us. And we've got to forget about that 1 or 2% that raised a complaint. And I think that's really important.
Oh, I love the questions coming in now. And I think that is so critically important, but I'll tell you, let's just acknowledge the fact that that's our bias, that we will pay attention to the one who has filed a complaint. We will pay attention to the one who's not happy. We all do it. You do it, I do it. And those aren't the ones we talk about. I mean, I don't really like to head into the staff room and go like, so anybody else got a complaint against them with the college? No? Okay, good. Cool. Me neither. That's cool. No, I don't. And so many of us go into this space of, when you serve particularly dysregulated people aren't going to be happy. Our job isn't to fix them all. Our job is to walk them home to the best of our capacity. I want to just get to John's question there. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So John is asking, how do you know, or does one know that you've kept your own sanity when reference points can get blurred in the craziness of the pandemic? So John, I think the question for me is, I think when you you sit with yourself, really about, I think we know ourselves so much better than we intuitively give ourselves credit for. When you're in this business, you are intellectually quite bright. So we have a lot of information often coming into us, which I promise you is it's so much easier if you weren't this smart, because we overthink about so many things, and we know so many things about the way the brain works and the way the body works and the way we interact with things, which sometimes adds fuel to the fire. But what I think is really critical in this moment is your answers are truly there when you are the most reconnected. Are you okay? Is a question to ask yourself when you are taking that breath, when you're out walking by yourself, or you're doing yoga, or whatever you do, right? To be able to look after you. And there's been a couple of times during this pandemic where I got to tell you, I mean, I jump on every morning, Monday to Friday, and speak to people about how we're going to survive this pandemic. And there's probably been like at least 3 days where I thought, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And I think we know that when we give ourselves room for it. Otherwise, we just push through it. So I think you do know. I think you do know if you've kept your own sanity. And I think really leaning on your people who can provide you some feedback, some conversation around that, the people who really matter to you, is important too. Anything, and did you want to jump in on that one at all, Janet?
Well, I see Lorraine had a question, and I think it's a really important one, because when we're healthcare workers and we're talking to our spouses, our children, our siblings, whatever, how do we make sure that we don't go into doctor mode and we stay in spouse, parent, sibling mode?
Okay, so this is the problem. Could I just tell you, my husband and I had a major knockdown shoot 'em out this week about that, because it's the difference between, how do we shut it off, being, the fixer of everything. And I think that, again, here's what's really critical about this is, people often say, okay, you got to shut it off. You got to be very conscious of those things. And all of those things are not right. I think we also are right. I'm sorry. I think we also have to acknowledge that for some of us, it's very difficult, because it is what we love. It is what we know. It is oftentimes what we're very good at. So those things are going to transfer. They're going to come with a really empty cup, and so are you. Here's the issue when we have families full, and particularly when we're married to other healthcare providers, is that typically why two people fall in love is because they can fill each other's cup. Okay, they can acknowledge, bear witness to. On the second date, oh my gosh, they were so excited to talk to you about things. You were so interested in the same things they loved, and you were like, wow, oh my gosh, you are a doctor, you want to be a doctor. That's amazing. Did you think about this? Did you think about this? Yeah. All of those things are fantastic. Now, I mean, so when I fell in love with my husband, he got a PhD in ruminant nutrition, which means how to feed cows. I was so damn impressed. In a second date, I was like, you're in feed, what? And he said, you want to check cows? You want to go to see cow? Yes, I'm very excited. Oh my God, you have judged cows all over the world. You're a leading expert in cattle, in the bovine. Now, we're 13 years into this. We have 3 children, okay? I could give a rip about cows. He comes home at the end of the day and says, oh, we had 2 bloats in this yard and this is really struggling. And I don't know, Joe, this agriculture industry. And I say to him, you think that's bad? I got puke in my bra. I don't know where the 2-year-old is. And I single-handedly saved 15 children today, okay? So you think you're worried about cows? How about you worry about me? This is the issue when we give ourselves away to other people and other things, particularly in a human services profession. When people are not well, we typically need somewhere to go to come home to. We typically need somewhere to land. And being conscious of that some days we won't have a lot left to give, is important to identify and to acknowledge and to even name it, right? You're exhausted and so am I. I really miss you. All I need right now is a hug and a glass of wine. Can you do that with me? That's it, right? don't ever underestimate that ability to acknowledge the partner. Even if you're the one who are exhausted, being able to say, I bet today was hard. Tell me more. Know that as soon as you do that and collect that, you'll get it back. And that's the hard part to remember when we're completely broken. But I think this is part of the issue, Lorraine, for me, around the special considerations that we never talk about. I don't know if you ever talked about, but I never talked about in grad school, about what do I do after I'm so awesome at my job? What do I do to keep my relationships good at home? We don't talk about that in any of our professions, for sure, in any of the first responding professions. Right? Which is why, I mean, we see police officers, firefighters, paramedics struggle so significantly because they are the ones that fix. Where do they put their stuff? You got stuff. You're the doctor. You got stuff. You want to put that? Is there not a medication for that? Seriously, right? We just want you to be fine so you can continue to serve. But what becomes really critical is, who are your people? Who know and love you when the doctor tag is off? And that they don't love you because you're a physician and you're amazing and you're smart. They love you because they want to say seriously to you, are you okay? Tell me more. What's the hardest part? Do you know what a hero you are? I'm so proud to know you. You are my best friend. Those are the things that fill us up. And oftentimes when we're married to another fella who does the same work, another person who does the same work as us, being very cognizant about where we get connection for us, them, each other, becomes really critical to the longevity of our careers.
Yeah, great advice. Just listening and yeah, Terry Potter's written some things in the chat, tell me more. What was the hardest part? What am I missing? How did you feel?
Yeah.
Those are all really important things.
And here's the deal, guys, like for all of you who are the hero to so many, right? That, oftentimes, I mean, I have one of the finest physicians, I think, in all of Alberta, but I feel like $1 million when I go and see her, regardless of whatever she has to give me for news. But I wonder what happens at the end of the day when you're in such a position of always asking other people those questions, who ask those of you, and really being cognizant of building up the people who can do that, who can be in a place to do that. And when we do that for our partners, they once were able to do that for us. If they're not anymore, which often happens in this whole marriage game, is how do we get back to that? Right. And often how we get back to that is saying things like, I don't know if I tell you this enough, but you matter to me. And the people we love the most are suspicious when we're kind. Okay. I was on the driveway of our Aaron and I this week. He was going golfing, something was happening. And I said, hey, stop. Can I give you a hug? And I leaned in for a hug to my personal husband, who, I mean, we've procreated 3 times. You understand? Like, we're in this. All right. And I hung on for more than this. And he said, what's wrong? I said, well, like, I'm your bride. I'm allowed to hug you on the driveway, right? Well, that was nice. Oh, okay. And then he texted me on his way, are you sure everything's okay? Like, are you having an affair? Holy shit. I mean, this has went south here. I was just being... But this is so true, right? The people we love the most are suspicious when we're kind. We're very good at caring for people where we don't have much skin in the game. And then we often are exhausted when we come home, needing somebody to do that for us. But we forget we were their hero first. Yeah. And so how do we just remember that in this moment? Because that's what all of this is for, right? That we have somebody, something to land at the end of the day, people who can appreciate us and remind us, who are regulated and be like, oh, Mom, you're amazing, right? Or Dad, I don't know if I told you that, but it's those kind of things that really keep you going. When my kids say to me, Mom, I heard, somebody was talking about you today, or somebody mentioned you at this thing. And I was just so proud of you. Stop. Right? When somebody acknowledges you in the community, they find you, even Janet, in the grocery store, and they just say, sorry, Dr. Craig, I don't want to bother you, but I just wanted to tell you, I don't know if you remember me, but I saw you 3 years ago. You changed my life. I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, when you get those moments of acknowledgement, I mean, what happens? We're like, put me in, coach. I'll fight Jason Kenny. I don't give a shit. I am not going anywhere. Even when, because that's why we're in this business, right? Is not for the accolades, but when you are not acknowledged, you cannot rise. And part of the timing and the discussion that happened at the hands of this provincial government was so concerning for me, because it was really a lack of acknowledgement of the true heroes in this pandemic. And if they're, do you know what I mean? And so that's the biggest issue. So, I mean, I listen, from the bottom of this mama's heart, I got to tell you, there has been more than one physician. All 5 of us have had COVID-19 that I have been so grateful for in this process. So just know that I am so grateful for every 82 of you who decided to sit through another friggin' Zoom call with me and Janet Craig, because we know you're exhausted with Zoom, but you're here. So I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the sacrifice and the sleepless nights and the worries for your own families, and the keep showing up online in technological places where you never thought you'd be practicing. This has been a heroic year that I think for so many times people will not even acknowledge or being able to really comprehend just what you've done. So, I mean, I hope I'm the first of many that says, thank you for what you've done, because I really cannot believe what we've managed to do to keep this province healthy.
So, there's a question about laughter. When is laughter appropriate? How can you make people laugh and maybe not take themselves so seriously?
Okay, so humor is my jam. And I think just because I've always been really funny, like naturally, because I don't know, I can tell you the big like psychiatric history behind that if you want, but I feel like what is so critical about this is I often say joy is the most vulnerable. I don't say this, Brene Brown said this, joy is the most vulnerable emotion on the planet. So people say, where are you at your most vulnerable? And they say, oh my gosh, when I'm in fear, or when I'm, experiencing grief. No, it's joy. It's joy. And I often say this, when is the last time you belly laughed with your kids? When is the last time you danced in your kitchen? When is the last time you attempted a TikTok and just let her go? Like, you know what I mean? It is those things. And what do we do that? I mean, the number one thing to get belly laughs is bring a fart machine to a staff meeting. I mean, like, it's stupid shit like that I think is fun. But honest time, like, I got to tell you, so many people have been so tired around me, my team. There's now 20 of us. I'm a CEO of a company. I don't even know how this happened. I'm a psychologist. I don't even like people. And now I have to lead all these people. I needed to deliberately find places to belly laugh. And if the people around me were too exhausted, I have a list of 5 comedians that I go to on the internet on a daily basis that crack me up. And I mean, we all have our own kinds of humor, but anybody who talks in a Newfoundland accent gets me every time. And there's a comedian out of Edmonton that I cannot even deal with her. I have to, every time I click on her, I am laughing. Fortune Feimster, who I got to interview a couple of weeks ago. She's a comedian out of, she's got this Netflix series called Sweet and Salty, not a series, a documentary or like a show. There are some times where I just need to belly laugh. And it's so critically important to be able to just notice how many moments of joy you get to hang on to in the run of a day. When your kid says something stupid, or they're an hour past bedtime and they're having farting contests. I mean, lay down and fart with them. Listen to what mom got. You know what I mean? I mean, we're always so in the state of heightened arousal, which is true. We got stuff to do, but I really want you to be cognizant of the moments of joy, because when you seek them, you'll find them.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our time. So any final comments for us? Any final words of wisdom, Jody?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I was just reading that last question there. Some days I feel like I'm wiped and I have little in the tank for those who matter most, and I feel guilty. Oh my gosh. Yes. Listen, when we care for other people all day, let's just normalize this experience of guilt. We are typically very, very good at caring for other people. But I will tell you this, as a child psychologist, I wrote a book called Kids These Days. If you watched me with my own kids, you wouldn't buy the book. Okay? We are so much better with other people's children. We are so much better. My best friend's kids come over and I'm like, oh, look, come here. What's Auntie making you for supper? And my kid says, Mom, I'd like a hot dog. Stop it. You will get what you get, right? And we are so much better in this place. And I think sometimes what happens is we have so much invested in the people we love the most. And so much about this is, how do we give ourselves some grace? How do we know that this is part of what we do every day? And to just sort of reflect on this fact that, like, oh my gosh, if you only knew, I think is really the critical piece. So harder to be compassionate. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, exactly. And listen, there's going to be more people that think this whole thing is a scam, because we know when people are in heightened state of arousals, what they do is they become very dichotomous in their thinking, right? So you're going to, the gray starts to dissipate, and we become very divided in our ways of showing up in the world. And that is a function of a 15-month heightened state of arousal. Not you, not your profession, not the factual basis of science. It is largely based in emotional dysregulation. And Stephen Covey, quoting the Bible, said, we got to seek first to understand before being understood. And that is the trickiest part when we know people are so wrong. How do we hold space? Not condone, support, believe. How do we hold space? Tell me more. What am I missing? What is the hardest part? It will get us so much farther, I think.
Right. Just one final question. Someone's asking about, how do we deal with patients that are, disagreeing with the research, maybe they're anti-vaccination. How do we, be respectful, but deal with them?
Yeah, so a colleague of mine out of BC, often he says this: I want you to collect before you direct. His name's Gordon Neufeld. He said, collect before you direct. And oftentimes when people say things, particularly the more asinine or unsupported the things they say, it becomes very difficult to collect, because you're like, are you kidding me? Though when you have those moments in your head, here's what becomes really critical. Sounds like there's some strong opinions there. Wow. Tell me more. And sometimes it is like, when I have no prefrontal cortex, right? If they're going to come in with multiple, they've Googled everything. They're very clear on how awful and how this pandemic is never going to be nothing and everything is very bad and you should never wear a mask again. Wow. Okay. You have done some research, haven't you? Okay. Come here. I'm going to get eye contact. I'm going to try to get on the same level, and I'm going to try my very best for the next 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, 5 minutes if I can afford it, to regulate. Then and only then will I come up the other side. And I can then say things like, right, it's not holding space forever and Mary Poppinsing the ever-loving Jesus out of everything. It is, tell me more. What's the hardest part? What are you worried about the most? Is there something you think I'm missing? All right, well, here's my thoughts. Here's what I'd like you to think about. If it's not a fit for you, I understand, right? And it's this idea about collect, direct. And it is the hardest thing to do, the more asinine they become.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I often say to patients, I think we might have to agree to disagree here, and then I move on. So
yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic session. We've come to the end of our time. So Carrie and Kelsey, you can put the link in the chat for the survey. And I just want to say that we're taking a break for the summer. So this is our last formal session until we bring you some more CPD in the fall. But for the moment, that's it. And we want everyone to have a wonderful summer. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jody. And thank you, Carrie and Kelsey, for the help. And we're getting lots of thank yous in the chat as well. So thanks, everyone. And fill your bucket a little bit over the summer. Make sure you take some time for yourself. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, Dr. Craig. Good night, everybody.